Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Welcome back to the Tech Ed Podcast. I am Matt Kirkner, your host. And if you tune in regularly, you know that we love Industry 4.0 technology on the Tech Ed Podcast. We talk incessantly about smart sensors and smart devices, additive manufacturing, augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, predictive analytics. You know that we live and breathe all of these technologies. When we can invite someone onto the podcast whose organization touts itself as a nonprofit Industry 4.0 knowledge center, you know that it's going to be a great episode. Our guest on this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast is Tom Kelly, the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of Automation Alley. I need to tell you that this is the first in a two-part series. And so we are going to be talking today with Tom Kelly about Automation Alley. And we're going to be answering questions like, is the American industrial sector ready for Industry 4.0? And is our workforce ready for Industry 4.0? So to get us started on those topics, it is my great pleasure to welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of Automation Alley, Mr. Tom Kelly. Tom, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Should be a fun conversation.
It's going to be a great conversation. We have a tremendous amount of ground to cover. So we are going to dive right in and start with the big picture about Automation Alley. You're one of the World Economic Forum's global networks of advanced manufacturing hubs called AMHUBs. You serve also as the co-chair of that network. So for our audience, let's start out with what is the AMHUB and what is the ultimate goal of this network?
Yeah, so AMHUB stands for Advanced Manufacturing Hub. And what the World Economic Forum did was they established these centers all over the world that focus on creating knowledge around Industry 4.0, all the technologies that you talked about, artificial intelligence and 3D printing and collaborative robotics. And the reason why they did this was the world is changing so rapidly that everybody has to be collaborative. If you think about it, you're never going to have this knowledge that supersedes the other knowledge that exists out there. It's always going to be the other way around. We know that when we started our careers, Matt, there was a lot of knowledge that companies kept inside related to IT or OT or any of these technologies, because you could get a long runway of competitive advantage by not sharing. Well, it's just the opposite today. You have to share to survive. You have to find ways to collaborate with others. And so these AMHUBs are the way to do that on the global stage. So, you know, we're based in Metro Detroit here. And you know, Metro Detroit is a powerhouse when it comes to automation, when it comes to factory robotics, all the things that go into this Industry 4.0 conversation that we're having. But there are groups around the world in Spain, in Britain, in Turkey that have equal amounts of knowledge. And we try to create this system where we all share it.
You know, I love the philosophy for starters, and you and I are exactly aligned in that whole idea. And we did, both of us, grow up in an industrial world where you took all of your secret sauce, anything that you thought was specific to your organization, and you kept it secret. Listeners to this podcast know that I write regular columns for Gardner Business Media, both in production machining and products finishing magazines. During my manufacturing days, I've been doing those columns for 17, 18 years now. One of the things that one of our team members said in one of our manufacturing companies is, why do you spend so much time sharing all of this stuff that we're doing? Shouldn't we be keeping that a secret? And my first answer to that was, well, we're sharing the things that we did last year. We're not necessarily sharing the things that we did this year. But the truth of the matter is that we live in such, as you put it, such a fast changing pace of manufacturing and advanced manufacturing technology that the only way to survive is to be able to learn from others. And the ticket to that dance is being willing to share with others as well. So I really love that philosophy as we talk about the work of the AMHUBs and your most important work as co-chair of that organization. You mentioned you're in Detroit, Michigan, and I want to talk about that a little bit before we get into all the specific work that is going on in Automation Alley. Tell us about Michigan. What makes Michigan such a prime location to house an Industry 4.0 focused hub?
Well, for up until recently, and by recent, I mean in the last decade, Michigan led the world in robotic adoption. And Michigan really invented the second industrial revolution. So Industry 4.0, maybe our viewers don't even know that it stands for the fourth industrial revolution. The first was steam, right? They created the locomotive and that changed transportation forever. And then Industry 2.0, we invented Michigan. It was Henry Ford. He invented the assembly line, which changed how productive work was done. And it forced everyone around the world to kind of adopt that kind of new method. And that went on for many, many decades. And Industry 3.0 was when computers and robotics came on the scene. But Industry 3.0, they call it a revolution, but it was really a continuation of Industry 2.0, right? You just did it faster and more efficiently. Well, Industry 4.0, this is the one that's going to get you. Because if you think about it, between 2.0 and 3.0, nothing's changed in 100 years. You just added layers of new technology onto what you already knew. Industry 4.0 is going to change everything we know. And so Michigan is a great place to do that for two reasons. One, we have a lot of knowledge, but two, we have a lot of hubris. And both of those things are important to learn from. Right? So if you look what Tesla's doing and how they forced change on the auto industry thought we were going to dictate terms of how electrification is going to go. Well, not really. And so they're all trying to catch up, and that's on the product side. But we also have to catch up on the factory side because there's lots of technology out in the world that we need to pay attention to. And maybe we have a little bit of hubris that we know a little better than anybody else, and that may not be the case.
It's one of my favorite words, actually, hubris, because you're exactly right. I mean, you get, as you look at people who get, a little bit comfortable in their own positions, comfortable with their own technology, comfortable with their own innovation. And as soon as you start to believe that you know everything, and as soon as you start to believe that you're the one that's going to tell everybody else how it's going to work, that's when you know that hubris is starting to set in, and you have to be a little bit careful because the graveyards of manufacturing companies are full of those that thought they knew better than everybody else and then found themselves looking over their shoulder and eventually getting passed up. So I really like your philosophy there as well of making sure that we're always open to change, that we're always open to the fact that we may not be the best. Really goes back to your answer to that first question, which is all about how do we collaborate, share information, and learn from each other to make sure that we're staying cutting edge. And some really good reflections on the evolution of industry, 1.0 through industry 4.0. You and I agree, this is the one that's going to change everything. We've talked on the podcast in the past, and we've written about the fact that I believe we're in the era of what we call industry infinity 0.0, where, we argue about, will there be an industry 5.0, 6.0? And my answer is, having watched what's happened in advanced manufacturing technology over these last 10 years, I don't think there's going to be another revolution. We are on constant evolution, and this technology is changing so quickly that we're not going to have to wait for that next big thing in manufacturing. So it's going to be fun to watch. And so I know Automation Alley is a really big and important catalyst in terms of industry 4.0 technology, in terms of making connections, in terms of working with employers and innovators and educators. We're going to get into that in detail, but from 30,000 feet, what is Automation Alley and what is the work that you do?
Yeah, so Automation Alley, we bill ourselves as Michigan's Industry 4.0 Knowledge Center. That doesn't mean that we have all the knowledge. What that means is we are the center. We say to everybody, come share what you know, take what you need. Right? Or take what is available. And so we try to be an aggregator. There's so much change happening. If you think about Industry 4.0 and the fact that it's not one technology, it's artificial intelligence, it's collaborative robotics, it's 3D printing, it's sensors, it's virtual reality, it's augmented reality. If you take any one of those I just mentioned, any one of those is disruptive to manufacturing. And you need to invest capital and sweat to understand how it's going to impact you. Well, when you take them all together, you can't even begin to model the complexities of how they all play off each other. And so that's what we mean by this industrial revolution. It is so complex that you cannot understand what business model you should be in. In the old days, it was, I have a capital asset. I know the business model I'm in. I just make that capital asset work and it produces goods I can sell. And it was expensive enough that you didn't have competitors coming in and wanting to buy that capital asset and then go down because you had 20 years of depreciation and all this crazy stuff. That's all changed. I could have a capital asset for $100 million that makes the cheapest widget in the world. And if I'm not careful, someone's going to invent a material that can go on a 3D printer that you can, or I can own, that can be cheaper than this $100 million factory that's all set up to make that widget so efficient. And that's what Automation Alley is. We're Michigan's Industry 4.0 Knowledge Center. And as such, that's how we entered into the relationship with the World Economic Forum, because they said, boy, our goals are aligned. Let's work on things together.
Well, and I hope especially our small to mid-sized businesses whose owners and leaders and employees, team members, our listeners to this podcast are hearing what you're saying, Tom, because I think it's a really important point. If you look back over the last, my 30-year career in manufacturing, some people working longer, you read the history books of things that happened before that. You're exactly right. Whether it was a punch press, a forming press, a machining center, a metal forge operation, whatever your value was in your competitive advantage and kind of your barrier to entry was that piece of equipment, right? If I have to, in today's dollars, invest, $250,000, $500,000, even more in a metal fabrication operation or just one machine to perform that operation, there's not a lot of people that can just reach into their pocket or go to a bank and buy a $500,000 press, right? But when we start talking about additive manufacturing, when we start talking about all these different materials and composites that are coming online, your business can be disrupted in ways that you never, ever expected it to happen. And by the time you figure it out, it's too late. And then that huge investment that you have in whatever that capital asset is potentially worthless overnight based upon that innovation and disruption. To me, that's really cool. It's really exciting. I love disruption and innovation, but it creates tremendous amounts of risk for our existing small to mid-sized and even large businesses. So I think one of the things that Automation Alley is doing to help combat this is your Industry 4.0 readiness assessment, kind of pursuing that last point that you and I just made. Are small to mid-sized companies finally realizing that Industry 4.0 is going to rock their world? And I would say 2 or 3 years ago, they didn't. And my, anecdotally, as we were talking to them, talking to educators, and the educators would say, well, our local employers just don't get it. How do we convince, and what's your pitch to a small to mid-sized business of why we need to get in the game? And tell us about this assessment as well and how that's part of the effort.
Yeah. So, it's a great question you just asked, because my answer would be, I'm not sure they are still getting it. In other words, there's still a lot of resistance. We have just at Automation Alley, we have 1,500 members. About 1,100 of them are small manufacturers. We have the big Ford, GM, Stellantis, all members, but most of them are, the under 10 million mom and pop shops that exist all over the country. Third generation, been kicking out products with that capital asset that they depreciated back in the 70s. It's, still making them money. And we don't see them really understanding or paying attention. And it's not that they don't want to, it's that what we see is there's a real fear that they don't understand, like the world has left them behind. Like they don't understand what the path is. So it's like, Tom, if I knew the path, I'd do it. Right. And so they don't really understand where to go. They don't understand how this technology and all the facets like we talked about. And so, that's why we came up with this assessment. And the assessment really evaluates not the technology, because that's the easy side of the equation. The assessment evaluates, are they culturally ready to change? Are they culturally ready to go on this new path that may not be the path they thought they were going to be on as a manufacturer?
Okay.
Right. And what we do is it's very simple, the assessment. We just ask them the same questions of management, and we ask the same questions to their employees, whether they have 3 employees or 30 employees or 3,000 employees.
Awesome.
And what you get is that divergence of, we ask them simple questions like, what business are you in? What do you sell? Right? And simple things. And what you find is what management thinks they know about the business and what the employees think they know about the business are usually quite divergent.
You bet.
And that sets up the conversation around, do you really understand what you want your business to be? Because before you invest a dime, you should be all aligned, because it's going to take everything in your power just to survive this transition. And we've been very successful with that assessment. And in Michigan, I can't say this, I can speak for the rest of the country, even though we cover all of the country now. It's a free assessment because it's paid for by the state of Michigan. They want these smalls to really digest what's happening and formulate a plan to move forward.
It's a really important strategy. For a while, I was going around the country with the 8 steps to a financial turnaround, and that was kind of the shtick. Number one on that list, and there's a huge parallel I think I'm hearing from your work on Industry 4.0. Number one on the list was face reality. That if a business is struggling for whatever reason, and in those cases it was usually a financial reason. In this case, it may be a technological or innovation reason. But when you say to me, a lot of these folks, they don't want to think about it because they're afraid of it, or they're afraid of it passing them by, or technology passing them by. If there isn't a better reason to get all in on Industry 4.0 than that, I'm not quite sure what it would be. And then to your point on the whole cultural thing, and I just totally agree on that. I'm a little bit of a student of Patrick Lencioni, and one of the things that he says is, is where are we going? Why do we exist? And what attitudes and behaviors are absolutely necessary for us to get there? And that defines the culture of an organization. And in today's day and age, especially for a small to mid-sized business, if you don't have a culture around innovation, around being nimble, around change, around responding to changes in innovation and technology and in your market, it's a really, really tough place to be. And I think it's going to be even more difficult. So I'm sure that's one of the trends that you're kind of finding from some of the work that you're doing. But tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing in these responses and what you're gleaning from the Industry 4.0 readiness assessment.
We've done about 150 assessments. So we have a good baseline sample now. It's statistically significant. And what we find is almost all manufacturers that are smaller have the same 4 issues. They have a lack of funding, they have a lack of resources, they have a lack of vision, and they have a lack of awareness. Other than that, they're doing great.
Yeah, everything else is perfect.
Everything's perfect. But that's because this is a new world that Matt, you've been in manufacturing. So, a manufacturer that's small, they live their life with their hair on fire from the moment they show up at the plant till the moment they go home, if they get to go home at all during that day. And so there's never any downtime to just think. There's no white space to think, where do we got to go? And this is the number one problem with manufacturing. Manufacturers wear that like a badge of honor. And I say, that's going to put you out of business. It's just, you're on this slow path to hell because every day you find a way to survive another day, but you're not changing the business to keep up with where it's going to go. So we need to stop that rewarding of people that, oh, I'm so busy. It's like, well, then you're not running your plant right.
100%.
Sorry to say it. If you're so busy, that means you're failing. Because when we get them to stop and pay attention, then we can say, if your hair wasn't on fire, where do you want the business to go? Do you want to own more IP? Do you want to be less of an order taker, more of somebody that's of value in the channel that can design? Do you do design work, or are you simply a commodity order taker with a machine in the back? Because I got a real problem with that.
Right, exactly.
For you going forward,
yep.
Right? You have to begin to create your own knowledge, your own intellectual property, and that's what we focus on.
I just think back to. And as you're aware, I ran a Rockwell Automation spinoff for a number of years. This goes back, a couple of decades. But I just want to reflect on something you just said, because there was honestly probably about a good year where it was 80 to 100-hour weeks, and people who haven't maybe worked in manufacturing or maybe high tech, where those types of weeks can be commonplace if you're working on really important or really crazy stuff. And we wore it like a badge. I worked 90 hours last week. I worked 100 hours last week. And then I ended up with a mentor, a gentleman by the name of Joe Tynan, who came in and helped me turn around the operations of one of our companies and really showed me what you just said, which is, you can say that you're like more dedicated than anybody else. Really, you're just wasting a lot of your own time because you're inefficient on your shop floor. And learning about how to use technology, how to use lean manufacturing, how to maximize throughput to run a plant, really, really important stuff. And today we've got so many tools available to us to be able to do that. When we think about smart technology, smart sensors, data analytics, predictive analytics, avoiding future downtime, all these kind of things that we can do with Industry 4.0 technology. But you're exactly right. If we don't get on to, what Stephen Covey calls important, not urgent, that quadrant in the 2x2 matrix that says that the most important things that drive our business are the things that are important, not urgent. And we always spend in manufacturing and everywhere else focusing on those things that are super, super urgent, but may not be driving long-term value in the organization. You got to get on to, how am I going to innovate? How's technology going to disrupt my business? And how do I get on to the next step? So really important work going on with the Industry 4.0 readiness assessment. So many follow-on questions I could come up with. Maybe we have you back for an episode in the future just to talk about that. But I want to make sure we're covering all the topics that I know, Tom, you and I wanted to get to. We're going to turn our discussion now, Tom, to the state of the Industry 4.0 workforce, which I know is a topic that's really near and dear to you, really near and dear to Automation Alley. As much as we love talking about technology here on the Tech Ed podcast, I think it's as important, maybe even more important, to focus on the people that are going to be working with, in and around emerging technologies, and especially the incumbent workforce. We spend so much time talking about how do we get more students into technical colleges? How do we get these technologies into, 4-year and advanced engineering programs? How do we get more high school students excited about careers in advanced manufacturing? But at the same time, you look forward 20 years and a lot of the people working in advanced manufacturing are there today. They're already working in manufacturing. So how's Automation Alley addressing the workforce skills gap around Industry 4.0 for those that are already in the workforce?
That's a great question. We partner with all our academic institutions. So I told you we have 1,500 members. I think at last count, something like 80 of them are academic institutions. So think Oakland University, Lawrence Technological University, Oakland Community College, Macomb Community College, all these, and 80 of them in different facets, Baker College, right? So we have all of these academic institutions. And we try and marry up what they're working on because, there's so much knowledge that gets created at these institutions. It's hard to marry up with the manufacturers that need these training solutions, if you will. So that's one way we do it, is through academics. The other way that we do it is, Microsoft is a partner. And they'll have their HoloLens, and we'll set up programs with them to try and educate the market on what is a HoloLens and what is it going to do to change the industry, right? So we work with both tech companies to get their word out. Like we did a lot of work with Autodesk and their regenerative design, because manufacturers that have Autodesk and even are literally just transitioning to 3D wouldn't even understand that the computer can actually do a lot of your design for you.
Right.
And so you're right. It's just a constant battle to get these smalls exposed to what is possible, because if you get them exposed and you can light that fire, they will be as dog tenacious as anybody to learn what they need to learn to make that go. If that's one thing about manufacturers, man, if they believe it, it's done, right? They'll
Absolutely.
get it done. But you gotta get their hair out first and let them look, and then you can get them excited to come along with you. And that's been the big challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it, though. When you think about the world of manufacturing and it's for those who haven't worked in it, maybe don't have an appreciation for, you have an order due on Friday, and it's Thursday morning, and your line goes down. Your customer doesn't care what your material problem is, whether or not your production line went down, whether or not you're having an energy issue, whatever. They need that part tomorrow. And I tell stories about, I was in a lot of contracts back when with the big three, that literally there was a clause right in the contract that if you shut their line down, they charge you back $250,000 an hour. And we talk about, well, would they really do that? And the answer was nobody knows for sure, because nobody ever let it happen. But you That's knew right. that there was going to be a pretty big stick waiting for you if you ever shut down a big three production line. But so you get really, really creative in problem solving, and to use kind of a worn out cliche, failure isn't an option. You can't just call and say, sorry, we tried. It doesn't work that way. But you can really take that same level of commitment, that same level of creativity and passion, and turn it toward, all right, if Industry 4.0 is the new order due Friday, how are you going to figure out how to implement this technology in a way that allows your company to remain competitive? So really, I think just a great analogy and example, and kind of speaks to the culture and the psyche within a manufacturing workforce. Do you agree?
True.
So another thing I think we do agree on is this whole idea of collaboration and how important it is to moving Industry 4.0 forward. You've touched on this a little bit in your last answer, but our listeners know we talk to people who are heading K-12 efforts. We talk to a lot of people from higher education, presidents, chancellors of universities and colleges. We've had, I don't know, in the last year, probably 20 Fortune 500 chairmen and CEOs join us. to talk about Industry 4.0, advanced manufacturing education. Your array of network members, and we already know this from the discussions we've had, collaborating on these initiatives through Automation Alley is really, really impressive. In addition to the insights you've already shared with us, Tom, tell us why it's so important to bring all these entities together on Industry 4.0.
Well, I think we touched on it right when we started the conversation, which was so much is changing in this I-4O world that nobody is an island unto themselves anymore. It used to be that you could invent your way through your own little R&D efforts, sort of what you needed and what your path was going to be. Well, today, that's just no longer true. You need to rely on others. So you need other industry partners. You need academia. You need government. You need as many friends as you can identify that can help solve big problems. What we're working on with the forum right now is circularity and sustainability, right? So that's a big buzzword as we go down this path of how do we get more sustainable? How do we create a circular economy so we're not having to waste as much? When you're trying to solve big problems like that, you need all of the resources to bear and all of the members of the ecosystem to come sit at the table. And that's what we try to do.
And it makes all the sense in the world, and the work that you're doing is really, really impressive, just in terms of these 1,500 different organizations that you managed to bring under one umbrella, working on the same common goals, the same Industry 4.0 initiatives. One of the things that I think about a lot, Tom, and I worry about a lot, I lived through, going back 20 years ago, this huge exodus of manufacturing to places all over the world, but certainly at that time, Asia was a huge influence. Ran a manufacturing plant that, through no fault of our own, customers moved business all over the world, and all of a sudden you lose 50% of your revenue and have to figure out how to make that back up. Fortunately, we were able to do that. But I've lived through a couple iterations of globalization. And as a diehard, tried and true American, I worry about the future of American manufacturing as well. You've got a unique perspective into global manufacturing, into Industry 4.0 readiness. If you're rating the United States in terms of our readiness for Industry 4.0 relative to the rest of the planet, where do you put us, and what do we still need to do?
So technological readiness, I'd put us at a 9.
Okay.
Manufacturing culture readiness, I'd put us at a 3. Right. And the reason why I say that is America is as well positioned as we've ever seen, in my opinion, in the last 100 years. Right. Once we got through Industry 2.0 and we started creating all this wealth, well, then the rest of the world went, we want some of that. And we didn't have a competitive response to a cheap labor equation.
Right.
So first Japan came on board. They had the cheap labor, and they had the cheap cars, and they all came in. Then China came on board. Then Mexico came on board. It seems like every time we turn around, there's some cheap labor country. Well, most of that in the world is played out. And now what you're seeing is companies making decisions based on, I need to make where I sell. I need to be more agile and resilient. I have to be careful that I don't get hung up in geopolitics or some kind of ecological issue or COVID or whatever the risk may be.
Right.
At the same time that technology is making the labor difference a non-issue. Mm-hmm. I can do lights out in China. I can do lights out in America. In fact, it's way cheaper in America in a truly, purely lights out environment because our energy, we have one of the best energy equations in the world. Right. Because we are energy independent and our energy costs are very inexpensive. And so when you start to put all this together, we didn't have this just 20 years ago, Matt. When you start putting the energy equation coupled with the 3D printing technology and all of the robotics and all of the AI and the fact that labor is getting played out everywhere around the world, you are going to see a resurgence in manufacturing. Now, what scares me, there's going to be a huge resurgence in manufacturing, and it's not going to be by the manufacturers. They're going to miss it. It's going to be by the tech companies.
Interesting.
That are going to say, you know what? I understand how to make it all. I'm just going to make it because I don't need the big capital equipment and the know-how anymore. I can have 100 3D printers and I can put this guy out of business tomorrow because I know how to run those 100 3D printers and they don't. And, that's why it's, you say, how could Apple want to get into a car? That's one of the most complex things. You say, well, no, Apple's saying the car is getting decomplexified as we speak. And the car is getting so decomplexified that I can get in that business because it's a battery with a motor and everything
software.
else is fluff.
Right.
Everything else is consumer experience. And what does Apple do really well? Consumer experience. So They're saying it's not that it was called Ford Motor Company and General Motors and Chrysler Motors because the motor was the complexity.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden the complexity is the user experience. And so the manufacturers are not going to be manufacturers anymore. That comes along. That's par for the course. That's the commoditized version. You need to be in consumer experience. And that's what worries me, is that the manufacturers won't participate in the manufacturing boom because they won't be ready for it.
Fascinating observations right there. And echoing so many of the things that kind of rattle around in my head. The first thing that I've been saying quite a bit the last several months is that if there's a silver lining to the existing supply chain challenges, it's now that the rest of the world understands what Tom Kelly and Matt Kirkner have understood for decades. And that's just a huge importance of, at least at this point in history, American manufacturing. And when you can get what you want it, when you want it, at a price you want to pay for it, everybody takes manufacturing for granted. And then when that model is disrupted, everybody's like, well, interesting. I guess those manufacturers do add some value. I think you're exactly right in that we're going to see more and more manufacturing moving closer and closer to the point of consumption. And that's really good news for manufacturing. And to your other point, the fact that labor component, which was so disruptive in 1970s Japan, 1990s into 2000s China, and then later in that decade Mexico, that goes away. So you think about those three things: the value people are understanding exists in manufacturing, the fact that it's going to come closer to the point of consumption, the fact that the labor advantage is starting to wane in favor of technology, and you put our technology here in the US at a 9. What a huge opportunity for those companies whose cultures are a 3 to move their culture to a 6 or 7 or 8, which is exactly what your organization is all about. And I know that our listeners, have been really, really intrigued by what it is that you're doing. For those that want to get more involved with Automation Alley, want to find you online, get in touch with you, how do they do it?
Super easy. It's automationalley.com. And there's all the resources you need. If you want to get involved, there'll be buttons to click on to get involved. There'll be knowledge to gain. Just come join us, be a part of the conversation. And we're a nonprofit. It's free to get the knowledge, right? We don't charge anybody to come in and get the knowledge. And if you want to be a part of a group or something, that's where we say, hey, well, to maintain that group, we ask you to participate with us financially, but it's really, really never going to be an impediment to to join us. The costs are minimal.
Participate with us, be part of the discussion. I'm really glad that we've been part of the discussion we've had today, Tom. Well, if you got as much out of this episode of the Tech Ed podcast as I did, you need to do 2 things. First of all, don't miss the opportunity to go to automationalley.com and learn all about Tom Kelly's organization. Secondly, you do not want to miss part 2 in this 2-part series. Next week on the Tech Ed podcast with our guest, Tom Kelly, we are going to talk all about Industry 4.0 technologies, including additive manufacturing. We're going to talk about startups, organizations, manufacturing companies, technology companies starting up in the Industry 4.0 space. And we'll talk about how we accelerate Industry 4.0 and how we create partnerships between education, industry, and organizations like Automation Alley. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.